The light came on at 2:04 in the morning, and she knew the exact time because she had been staring at the clock on the microwave when it happened. The green digits the only thing keeping her company while she stood at the sink, waiting for a glass of water to stop tasting like nothing. It was a lamp. She was certain of that immediately. Not the cold blue flicker of a television, not the restless sweep of a phone screen. A lamp, throwing that particular shade of amber that belongs to old bulbs and lived in rooms, steady and full and completely without hesitation. Someone had walked into that room and reached for the switch the way you do when the dark is already familiar to you. The house next door had been empty for 11 weeks. She counted 4 minutes by the microwave clock, standing very still with the water glass held against her sternum, watching the window the way you watch something you are not sure is real. The curtains in that room, she realized, were not the curtains that had been there before. The Aldersons had kept white sheers. These were darker, heavier. They held the lamplight close instead of letting it breathe through. Then it went off, and the window was just a rectangle of nothing, same as all the others. Power surge, she told herself. Old wiring, a timer someone had forgotten to cancel. She set the glass down on the counter without drinking from it and stood there for a long time, watching the dark. My mother would have called it a sign, the lamp coming on like that. She believed in signs the way some people believe in weather. Not as something mystical exactly, but as information you would be foolish to ignore. I wished, standing there in her kitchen with the water glass still warm from my hand, that I had listened to more of what she said while I still had the chance to argue with her about it. I had been back 4 days. 2 weeks was the plan, enough time to sort through 40 years of accumulated life, meet with the estate attorney, decide what to do with the house itself. The realtor kept using the word opportunity. I kept not calling her back. The neighborhood was quieter than I remembered, though I could not decide if it had actually changed or if I was simply older. The trees had grown enormous in 4 years, their canopies pressing together over the street so that even the streetlights only reached the pavement in pale, broken pieces. The yards were deep here, the houses set back and private. In summer, that had felt like shelter. In November, it felt like something else. The Aldersons had left following what the people on this street referred to only as the incident, their voices dropping into that particular register people use when they have decided a thing is finished and do not wish to be responsible for opening it again. My mother never told me the whole of it. Some houses hold things, she said once, and then changed the subject, and I let her, the way you let someone change the subject when some part of you already suspects you do not want the rest of the sentence. The grass was wrong. That was the first thing she understood, standing at the edge of her property where the sidewalk cracked and heaved from a tree root she remembered tripping over as a girl. The Alderson lawn had been a wilderness the last time she had visited. 6 years of neglect turned to something almost aggressive, knee-high and seeded and tangled with the woody stems of things that had given up being flowers. Now it was cut. Not recently, but recently enough. 2 weeks at most, she decided, maybe 3. The edges were still loose, still softening back toward disorder, but someone had been here with a mower and had meant it. She went inside and called the number on the realtor's sign. The recording that answered her told her the line had been disconnected or was no longer in service. She hung up and found the listing on her laptop, the same one her mother had shown her years ago, with an expression she had not been able to read at the time. The posting dated from 5 years back, expired. No new listing attached to it, no rental notice, no name she could search. The sign in the yard still stood as though it had always stood there and always would, red and sun-faded and pointing at nothing. A property management company handled the basics sometimes, kept up appearances for the bank or the estate or whoever held the note. She told herself this, and it was reasonable, and she told herself again. She found the box without looking for it, which was the kind of thing she had stopped believing in coincidences about. It was tucked behind the water heater in the utility room, cardboard gone soft at the corners from years of proximity to warmth and pipe condensation. Her mother's handwriting on the side, just the one word, misc. The category of things you cannot bring yourself to name. Most of it was what she expected. A rubber-banded roll of coupons expired before the turn of the decade. A photograph of a woman she did not recognize, standing in front of a car she did not recognize, in a place that could have been anywhere. Recipes on index cards in her mother's small, cramped script. The measurements sometimes guessed at, sometimes missing entirely. The way you write a thing you believe you will always remember. The notebook was at the bottom. Spiral-bound, the cover warped, the pages dense with her mother's handwriting in the particular blue ink she had always used. She sat down on the utility room floor without deciding to sit, and turned past the grocery lists and the appointment reminders and the name of a plumber circled twice. She turned until the handwriting changed, not in form, but in pressure. The pen had been pushed harder against the page. The letters leaned differently. Her mother had been watching the house. She wrote about a shape, just the word shape, in the downstairs rooms at night. She wrote about a smell on warm evenings, something like a room sealed for a long time being opened again slowly, aired out in preparation. The last entry said only, "I think it is almost ready for them." She did not sleep well that night, or the night after. She lay in the dark and listened to the house settle, and told herself that was all it was. Old wood and old pipes finding their positions in the cooling air. And the third night, she finally drifted somewhere shallow and gray that did not feel like rest. She woke at 2:17. The red numerals of the clock said so, and she believed them. It took her a long moment to understand what she was hearing because it was so ordinary, so entirely wrong in its ordinariness. A radio, coming from next door. Something with strings, lilting and slow, the kind of melody that belonged to a parlor, to a party that ended before she was born. She could almost hear voices behind it, laughter just below the register of the music, comfortable and familiar and completely impossible. She went to the window. Every room she could see in the Alderman house was lit. Not the flat blue glow of a television left on, not the pale wash of a single bulb. Warm light, amber and full, the kind that comes from lamps with shades. She pressed her fingers against the glass and felt the cold come through. In the front room, the one with the big bay window that had been empty for 6 years, for all 6 years she had walked past it and seen nothing, there was a couch. There was a lamp with a patterned shade. There were curtains on the rod, hanging still and straight, as though they had always been there, as though she had simply never looked carefully enough before. She told herself she was only going to look. The smell reached her before she even cleared the property line. That same sealed room exhale her mother had described, but warmer now, complicated by something underneath it, something that made her think of a kitchen at the end of a Sunday, of a table recently cleared, of a house that had been breathed in by people for so long that the walls had absorbed it. She pulled her cardigan tighter and kept walking. The sidelight beside the front door was narrow, and she had to lean close, her breath fogging the glass. The front room was exactly as she had seen it at 2:17 in the morning. The couch, the lamp with the patterned shade, the curtains hanging straight and undisturbed. On the hook inside the door there was a coat, dark wool, heavy, the kind that belongs to someone who actually lives somewhere. On the mat below it, a pair of shoes, plain and worn at the heel, turned inward slightly, the way shoes go when someone steps out of them without thinking. She stepped back. She looked at the mailbox. The name was painted in small, careful letters. The paint was old. It was slightly faded at the edges, chalky where the weather had gotten to it, the way paint goes after years of sun and rain. She knew with absolute certainty she had stood at this mailbox 2 days ago. She knew she would have seen it. She turned to go, and the chair stopped her. Her mother's dining chair, one of 4 she had catalogued herself, still inside the house, still pushed under the table, sitting on the porch, facing the yard, facing her. She carried the chair inside without letting herself think about what she was doing. She set it back at the table, tucked it under the edge the way it had always been, and she did not look at it again. She locked both doors. She checked the windows in the order her mother had always checked them, left to right, each latch pressed down twice, and she did not ask herself why she still knew that order. When her sister answered, she sounded warm and a little sleepy, and so ordinary that something in her chest loosened. She told her about the mail piling up, about not sleeping well, about the particular loneliness of a house that still smelled like someone else. She did not tell her about the chair. Her sister said what she had expected her to say, that grief did things to people, that the mind under enough weight will start to bend toward the familiar shapes of what it has lost. She said it gently, and it was probably true, and she let it be true for the length of the call. She went to bed at 10 with every light burning. She woke at 2. She knew without checking. She lay still and kept her eyes on the ceiling and listened to the quality of the dark around her, and for a long time there was nothing. Then the creak, the third stair, that specific complaint of old wood under pressure, the one she had learned in childhood, the one no one knew to avoid unless they had lived there long enough to love it. She turned on every light in the house. She moved from room to room with her hand hitting each switch before her body crossed the threshold, and the light did what light is supposed to do, which is reveal. And what it revealed was nothing. No one in the closets, no one behind the shower curtain she pulled back with a hand that had stopped shaking only because she had made it. Every window latched. Both doors still locked from the inside, the deadbolts thrown, the chains seated in their slots. She stood in the center of the kitchen and breathed through her nose and told herself what her sister had told her. Then she saw the ring on the table, a pale circle on the wood she had wiped herself, wiped dry, wiped until the grain showed clean under the overhead light, still slightly damp at the inner edge. She pressed one finger to it and felt the warmth come back to her through her fingertip, faint and unmistakable and impossible. The paper was folded once, sitting beside it. She knew the notebook. She had been working through it slowly, one entry at a time, the way you eat when you are not hungry but know that you must. She had not reached this page. The date was 2 years back. Her mother's handwriting filled most of it, those familiar looping letters, and she read the lines and read them again and felt the floor do something strange beneath her. At the bottom, in ink that had not yet fully dried, someone had added 7 words. Welcome home. The kitchen light is on. Nora stands in the hallway and stares at the thin bar of yellow beneath the door, and she cannot make it mean anything innocent. She turned it off. She remembers the specific click of the switch, the way the darkness had settled over the kitchen like a held breath, because she had stood there a moment in that darkness, thinking about her mother and not wanting to move. The glass in her hand is warm. She looks down at it slowly, the way you look at something you have just realized is wrong, and the water inside is perfectly still, perfectly clear, reflecting the ceiling in miniature. She has no memory of walking to the kitchen. She has no memory of turning on the tap. She has been in bed, or she believes she has been in bed, and yet here she is, in the hallway, in her socks, with a full glass of water that has clearly been sitting out long enough to lose the cold. She tilts it toward the light, just slightly. The lip print on the rim is pressed in close and deliberate, the faint ghost of a mouth that opened and drank and set the glass back down. Her own lips are dry. She runs her tongue across them and tastes nothing, feels the slight pull of skin that has not touched water recently, and the certainty settles into her chest like something with weight. That print is not hers. Behind the kitchen door, nothing moves. The house simply waits. She had arrived on a Tuesday, 3 days after the burial, because 3 days felt like the right amount of time to gather herself, and then she had discovered it was not. The house key stuck in the lock the way it always had, and that small, familiar resistance was almost enough to undo her completely. She told herself the house was just a house. She walked from room to room and said the names of things quietly, a private inventory. Couch, lamp, the blue ceramic bowl her mother kept fruit in even after her mother had stopped eating fruit. She said the names the way you press on a bruise, testing. The chair was the first thing, pulled back from the kitchen table at an angle as though someone had just stood up, and Nora had straightened it and moved on. The window in the guest room was the second. She was nearly certain she had latched it on her first walk through, but there it was the following morning, open a careful inch, the curtain lifting just slightly in the cold that came through. She latched it again and told herself the house was settling, told herself old houses breathe. The glasses stopped her longest. Her mother had kept them on the side table always lenses up, a habit so ingrained it had become a kind of signature. They were folded neatly, lenses pressed to the wood, facing down, the way you might set something aside after use. Nora stood over them for a long moment and then left them exactly as they were. She found it while pulling her mother's winter coats from the closet, a slim leather journal wedged behind a baseboard that had worked itself loose from the wall, the wood swollen and soft at the edges as though the house had been slowly exhaling around it for years. She assumed it was her mother's. Her mother had kept things, recipes on index cards, prayer lists in the margins of old envelopes, small written records of a life that needed to be remembered because forgetting felt like loss. Nora opened the journal expecting that. She got something else. The first entry was dated March of 1953. The handwriting was tight and formal, the kind taught with a ruler. It described the position of the kitchen chairs, the time the upstairs radiator began to knock each evening, the hour a woman named Helene went to bed. There was no warmth in it. It read the way a field researcher writes, careful and without feeling. The handwriting changed 4 entries later, changed again 20 pages on. She counted at least 4 distinct hands across the decades, each picking up without acknowledgement of the one before, as though the keeping of this record was simply a thing the house required. She turned to the final entry. The date was 11 days ago. Her mother had been in the hospital for 3 weeks by then. The handwriting was not one she had seen in the journal before, and it was not one she recognized at all. The entry was 4 words and a time. She is sleeping now, 2:14. The clock above the stove read 2:09. Nora had lost track of how long she had been sitting there, the journal flat on the table in front of her. The kitchen reduced to a small island of lamplight, surrounded by the kind of dark that feels occupied. She turned pages slowly now, the way you move through a house where something feels wrong, but you cannot yet name it. The entries from the 70s were meticulous, domestic observations recorded with the patience of something that had nowhere else to be and nothing else to want. She does not know the boy is standing behind her. The sentence sat in her chest like a stone dropped into still water. She read it twice and did not look up. The entry from 1989 was worse because of its certainty. He will check it a 4th time tonight. He always does. Not a prediction, a correction, as though the writer already knew the ending and was simply noting where the subject had gone wrong in imagining otherwise. She turned the page. The handwriting was new, and it was not new. She recognized it the way you recognize a voice heard through a wall. Not the words, but the shape of them, the particular weight each letter carried. The ink looked recent. The date was today. She is at the kitchen table. She has found the page. Her hands have gone very still, which means she already understands. She will look up in a moment. She always does. The clock above the stove turned to 2:14. Nora closed the journal. She opened it again. She took her phone from her pocket and photographed the page with hands that she watched from a strange distance, as though they belonged to someone calmer and more practical than she felt. The flash turned the kitchen white for a moment, and then the dark came back, closer than before. She told herself her mother knew someone, an odd woman from the historical society perhaps, the kind who kept elaborate records as a hobby, who had a key and too much time and a sense of humor that had curdled into something cruel with age. She told herself this clearly, in complete sentences, the way you argue with a sound you have already identified as the house settling. She called Marcus. It rang 5 times and went to voicemail, and she spoke into it carefully, describing the journal, the dates, the handwriting, the 4 words at 2:14. And when she hung up, she played it back immediately, because she needed to hear that she sounded reasonable. She did not sound reasonable. She sounded like a woman translating something from a language she understood only well enough to know she was in trouble. She looked at the entry again. She had avoided the lines below the ones she had already read, but they were there, patient and waiting, and she read them now. She will go to the window above the sink. She said aloud that she would not. The word no moved through the kitchen and dissolved. She was already standing at the window. The yard beyond the glass was very dark and not quite still. The yard held nothing, just the oak, the fence, the rusted chair sitting at its usual angle like something that had given up. Nora let out a breath she had been holding since the flash of her phone camera, and watched it fog the glass and fade. The journal was in her hands. She did not remember picking it up from the table. The entry continued below the line she had already read, and the light above the sink was just bright enough, and so she read it, the way you do when you already know you should stop, when stopping has simply become a thing that other people do. She looked up. The window of her mother's room was lit from within, amber and soft and particular, the precise shade of the lamp her mother had kept burning on the nightstand for as long as Nora could remember. The lamp she had not touched since the funeral, because touching it had felt like agreeing to something she was not prepared to agree to. The room had been dark when she arrived. She was certain of this, the way you are certain of the things you cannot afford to be wrong about. She read the last line of the entry. She will go upstairs now. She will finally be ready. The word finally sat in her chest like a stone dropped into still water, and she felt the rings of it move outward, and she understood that the journal was not predicting what she would do. It was telling her what she had always been going to do. She climbed the stairs the way you cross a frozen lake, slowly, testing each step, waiting for the sound that means everything beneath you has given way. The carpet was the same worn burgundy it had always been. The banister felt the same under her palm. Everything was the same and nothing was right, and she kept climbing. The amber light beneath her mother's door was warm in the way that old things are warm, patient, accumulated, a warmth that had been present so long it had become indistinguishable from the walls themselves. Nora stood outside it for a moment that had no real length. Then she pressed the door open. The room was exactly as it had been left. The bed pulled taut and precise. The window opened 1 inch to the night air, the curtain lifting and settling, like something breathing at rest. The lamp on the nightstand burned its particular amber and cast its particular shadows. And on the nightstand, beside the lamp, lay the journal, open to a new page. Nora looked at her hands. She was holding the journal. She looked at the table. The journal was there. Both of them were there. Both of them were real in the particular way that things are real when you are not yet able to refuse them. She stepped closer. The page on the table was not yet full. Even as she stood over it, the ink moved. It did not scratch or hurry. It spread the way a dark thing spreads in water, deliberate and patient and certain of itself. She has always been here. She never left. She is reading this with you. She backed into the hallway, and the door swung shut behind her with the quiet certainty of something that had been waiting a long time to close. The light in the corridor caught her in the mirror at the far end, and she stopped because she had no choice. Because the mirror held her there the way mirrors do when something in you already knows and is only waiting for your eyes to confirm it. She looked at herself for a long time. She looked at her hands first, the ink still faint along the side of her right palm, the smear of it just below her smallest finger, the particular ghost of it that a person accumulates after hours of writing without noticing they are writing. She had not noticed. She was noticing now. Then she looked at her face, and her face was ordinary, and that was the worst part, that nothing in it had broken open, that she looked like someone who had simply been home a long time. The handwriting. She had been circling it all night, the way you circle a word you cannot quite pronounce. And when it arrived, the knowing arrived all at once, total and seamless, the way your own reflection arrives. Not learned, simply recognized. 40 years of entries, her hand, her particular slant, the way she closed her lowercase e, the way she never lifted the pen between certain letters. Hers. She thought about the final line still warm on the page in the room behind her. 6 words. The light in the corridor hummed and held her, and somewhere in the walls the house settled like a thing made comfortable, like a thing that had nowhere else to be. The wood is warm beneath my palm, not the warmth of pipes running through the walls, not the residual heat of a room recently occupied. Something slower than that, something patient, like pressing your hand flat against the chest of a sleeping animal and feeling the life move underneath. I count the doors again. I have counted them 3 times now, touching each frame as I go, the way you touch the pages of a book you have already read to make sure the words are still there. My old bedroom, the bathroom, my parents' room, the linen closet at the end of the hall. 4. There have always been 4. My father painted these walls the summer I turned 9, and I remember standing in this exact spot, watching the roller drag pale yellow over the old white, and there was no 5th door then. There was nothing between the bathroom and my parents' room but 6 feet of wall and a framed photograph of the Oregon coast. The photograph is still there. It hangs between the bathroom and this door, as if it always hung beside a door, as if the door was always here and I simply never noticed. I take my hand away. The warmth stays on my palm like something transferred. I go back to my room and I lie down in the dark and I do not close my eyes. The house settles around me. Its old familiar creaks and murmurs, but from the hallway there is nothing. A silence so complete it has a shape, a silence that does not breathe. My mother had been gone 11 days when I drove back to Crestwood. The funeral was small. she would have wanted it smaller. I stayed at a hotel the night before and the night after, and told myself I was being practical, that the house needed airing out, that I was not afraid of it. On the fourth day, I ran out of excuses and packed a bag and turned onto Sycamore and sat in the driveway for a long time with the engine running. Inside, the house received me the way it always had. The third stair announced me. The bathroom window shuddered in its frame when I shut the front door too hard, the latch still broken after 30 years. The den smelled of her, and underneath her smell was the older smell, the olive green paint my father had rolled onto those walls the year before he died. And my mother had never touched it, not once, because she was that kind of stubborn and that kind of loyal, and now she was gone too. I slept well the first 2 nights, deeply, dreamlessly, in a way I had not managed at the hotel. The house held me like it remembered the shape of me. On the third morning I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and did what I always do when my hands need something to do. I sketched the floor plan from memory. Every room, every wall. An old habit from a single semester of architecture I never finished. When I was done, I counted the rooms. The number was correct. I folded the paper and left it on the table and did not think about it again until that night. The hallway had always been narrow enough that you could touch both walls if you spread your arms, and I had done that as a child, walking it like a tightrope walker, fingers trailing the paint. I set the boxes down and stood at the entrance and looked toward the spare bedroom door and felt the first quiet pull of something being wrong without knowing yet what it was. I walked it. I counted under my breath. 14 steps where I had always counted 10, where I would have sworn on anything I owned that it was 10. I stood at the far end and looked back toward the kitchen, and the proportion of it was off in a way I could not name, the way a face is off in certain photographs, technically correct and deeply wrong at the same time. I laughed. The sound sat flat against the walls. Grief does something to a person, I told myself. Grief telescopes the familiar, warps your internal compass. I had been sleeping in my dead mother's house, eating from her cupboards, using her towels. Of course, my sense of scale was unreliable. But I went back to the kitchen. I retrieved the sketch. I carried it to the hallway and held it up and walked the length again with the paper in front of me like a kind of map, measuring one against the other. The rooms on either side of that hallway could not account for the space the hallway was now claiming. I stood at the far end for a long moment. Then I took a pin and drew a small question mark at the closed door of the spare bedroom and went and pinned the sketch to the refrigerator under the lobster from Maine and tried not to look at it for the rest of the night. She called Daniel at 9, ostensibly to ask about the utility account, and stayed on the topic for approximately 40 seconds before letting it drift into the familiar territory of nothing in particular, his kids, the drive up, whether she had eaten anything real. His voice had the quality it always had on the phone, slightly compressed, slightly far away, like something heard through a wall. He said, almost as an aside, that he was glad she was the one handling the house. She asked him why. He said he had always found it strange. She waited. He laughed a little, the way people laugh at things they mean, and said he used to have a dream about it, a recurring one, that there was a room their parents said was not for children, that he would stand outside it in the dream and put his eye to the keyhole and see nothing, but he would hear breathing, slow and even and patient. She kept her voice level and asked which hallway. He said upstairs. She asked what the door looked like, and he paused and said he could not remember, and she said that was fine, that it was interesting, and changed the subject to his youngest starting school in the fall. They stayed on the phone for 2 hours. She laughed several times. She poured a glass of water and did not drink it. When he hung up, the silence came back into the house at a different frequency than before. Not the silence of an empty place, the silence of a place that had been listening. She had started leaving the hallway light on, the way you leave a light on for someone you are expecting, and on the fifth night she woke at 2 in the morning to find it off. Not dimmed, not burned out. Off, with the particular completeness of something that had been switched. She lay still for a moment, listening to the house breathe around her, and then she got up. The hallway was cold in the way that rooms get cold when they have been cold for a long time. Not a draft, but a depth, a stored coldness, as though the air had been sitting there undisturbed since some other winter. She counted the doors without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the fifth, which she had been approaching without knowing it, because her feet had carried her there the way feet sometimes know before the rest of you does. It was not different. That was what her mind kept snagging on, the way a sleeve catches on a nail. The paint was the same color, the same age, the same slight scuff at the bottom that all the doors had from years of furniture and boxes and careless living. It did not look like an intrusion. It looked like it had grown there slowly and quietly over decades and waited for her to be alone and tired and standing in the cold at 2 in the morning with nothing to protect her but the small light of her phone. She took the photograph. She went back to bed. In the morning, the door was there in the image, plain and patient and fully itself, and the relief lasted only a moment before it curdled into something worse. Because a door that appeared in photographs was a door that had always existed, and if it had always existed, then she had spent 18 years walking past it without seeing it, which meant she had never known this house at all, and the house had known her completely. She found the county assessor's website on her third cup of coffee, her mother's reading glasses sliding down her nose because she had not yet brought herself to move them from the kitchen counter. The blueprint was there, digitized and clean, a black and white fact from 1952, and she printed it at the library while the librarian found reasons to be busy at the far end of the room and did not comment on the sound the paper made in her hands. She spread it on the kitchen table beside her own sketch. She had drawn the upstairs hall from memory, 4 rectangles indicating 4 doors, and the blueprint confirmed it in the calm, authoritative language of architecture. 4 rooms, 4 doors. She drove back and walked the hall herself, touching each door as she passed it, counting under her breath like a child proving something to a bully. 4. She laughed then, a long, unraveling sound that she let go of because there was no one to hear it, and poured wine she did not particularly want, and raised the glass toward the ceiling, and said out loud that the house was just a house, and that she was fine, and that grief did strange arithmetic to the mind. The heat moved through the pipes in the walls, ticking and settling, the ordinary language of old wood and winter. She rinsed her glass and turned toward the hallway, and there, on the wall above the staircase, was a shadow that belonged to nothing in the room. Rectangular, patient, exactly the size of a door. She went upstairs. She told herself she was going to bed. The hallway was dark, except for the thin orange seam under the bathroom door, where the nightlight had burned for 20 years. Her mother's small domestic mercy against 3 a.m. and old age. And she counted the doors as she passed them, the way she had counted them that afternoon. 1, 2, 3, 4. And they were all there. All 4 of them, solid and accounted for, and exactly where they had always been. She counted them again. 4. She pressed her back against the wall at the top of the stairs and looked at the whole length of the hallway at once, and counted them a 3rd time, a 4th. And they were always 4, would always be 4. And she was fine. She had always been fine. And the wine was still warm in her chest, and she was going to bed. She walked the hallway anyway. She pressed her palms flat against the plaster between each door, both hands, the full surface of her skin, and the walls were cool and indifferent the way old walls are, damp and mineral and faintly chalky, until she reached the stretch between the bathroom and the spare room and stopped. The warmth was not dramatic. It did not burn. It was the warmth of something that had been running a long time, patient and constant. The warmth of an engine left on in a closed garage, and her hands went very still against it. She pressed her ear to the wall. The breathing was slow. It was comfortable. It did not hitch or quicken. It stopped. The silence that followed was the most specific silence she had ever heard, shaped and deliberate, the silence of something that had just lifted its head. She does not run. That is the last and strangest thing she tells us, and it is the detail that stays with you long after the story is over. She stands there with her palms still warm from the wall, and she does not move, because moving means stopping listening, and she cannot stop listening, because the silence that followed the breathing is not empty. It is full. It is the most deliberate silence she has ever heard, shaped around the precise moment something became aware of her. And it presses against her eardrums like a held breath, like a word about to be spoken. And she stands in it for what she will later calculate was 6 minutes. She backs toward the stairs slowly, the plaster cool again under her trailing fingertips, and she is almost there, almost to the landing, when she passes the spare room door and sees it. A thin amber line along the floor, warm and steady, and the exact shade of the lamp her mother kept beside the reading chair, the one she packed into a donation box on the very first day, the one she left by the front door for the charity truck to collect. She does not open the door. She leaves the house, drives 20 minutes to a motel, and she tells us she will never go back. Then she pauses. And in the pause is the thing she has only just understood. The thing that has turned the whole night inside out. The spare room was one of the 4 doors she counted. Whatever turned that lamp on was already inside one of the rooms she walked past. Not in the walls, not in some hidden space she never knew about. Already inside. Already waiting, in the house she has known since she was born, patient as breath, patient as dark, patient as something that has always lived there and never once needed her to know.